Well, let's begin. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the fourth installment of the Thinking Freedom from the Global South speaker series. I am Irene Calise in American University's Department of Critical Race, Gender, and Culture Studies, joined here with my co-host,
Malini Ranganathan. Welcome, everyone. And I am faculty director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center and also faculty at American University. The title of today's event is Freedom Sings, Stories of Nishnaabeg Resistance and Resurgence. It features our keynote speaker, Dr. Leanne Betasamosake Simpson, who will be introduced shortly. Dr. Simpson, my graduate environmental justice course, is here today. We've been reading your work and thinking freedom with you and other scholar activists in this series. So it's extra special and a real honor that we can listen to and engage with you live today. The Thinking Freedom series is a collaborative initiative co-sponsored by the Anti-Racism Center, the Department of Critical Race, Gender, and Culture Studies, and the Women's Initiative of AU's Student Government. I want to add here that the series is the brainchild of my colleague, Professor Irene Calise, and none of this could have happened without her incredible connections and solidarity with radical activists and thinkers around the world and here in North America. So sincere thanks to you, Professor Calise. We also wish to thank Professor Eileen Finlay, Chair of CRGC, Chelsea Anderson, Director of Special Events in the College of Arts and Sciences, Monica Morin, Senior Administrative Assistant in CRGC, and Dylan Singleton, who is the website coordinator in CAS. All of them have helped to make this initiative a reality. Quick announcements before I turn it over to Professor Calise again. This event is happening via Zoom webinar, which means that your video and audio automatically turned off, but please use the Q&A function. And students, if you feel comfortable doing so, please do not make your question anonymous. We'd love to hear you and see what you're thinking about this conversation. Live captioning will be available throughout the event, so please access the service by clicking the CC icon. And finally, it is being recorded, which I'm always very pleased about because we can listen to it afterward and share with our friends and networks. So over to you, Professor Calise.
well, thank you so much. I would like to also extend my sincere gratitude to Professor Ranganathan for supporting this series. And without your support, this really wouldn't be happening. So thank you so much. This has been an enriching experience for me to be sharing this space with these amazing people, including yourself. The Thinking Freedom from the Global South series centers the question of human freedom from the perspective of history's underside, in Fanonian terms, the damned of the earth. Each speaker is engaged in radical intervention across different emancipatory and anti-colonial struggles, and will consider how grassroots intellectual actors are thinking about and forging alternative futures. Despite their different contexts and experiences, these communities share a common struggle for land as the basis of life, for human dignity, and the belief that another world is possible, not only possible, but is necessary and urgent. As our speaker today has remarked in her own settler colonial context, these concerns are not a cause, they are one's life. The series is part of a course with the same name I'm offering this semester, and we meet at the time of the series that the series is being held. And it's these students who sit at the heart of this initiative. They are our main partners here. And it is clear for these remarkable people that they are deeply committed to the work we are engaged in together in this series and in our class. Today's segment in our series reminds us that the Global South is not so much about geography as it is about one's positionality within the racial, capitalist, and colonial politics we are addressing in this series. Our guest today brings into stark relief the histories of erasure that these processes rely on. In North America, as in other settler colonial societies in which the land itself is coveted, colonial claims to indigenous lands and the perpetual creation of new settlers rely upon what the late Edward Said called the functional absence of the indigenous population. This begins as an ideological erasure, where the indigenous inhabitants are either rendered invisible or inconsequential to colonial claims. The notion of the frontier and pioneer embody this colonial worldview and can be found in the origin myths of settler states the world over, whether in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, apartheid South Africa, or Palestine. In this settler narrative, the coveted land is imagined as a frontier, an empty space, wild yet undomesticated by white civilization. In settler history, the pioneer in turn is idealized as the heroic forefather and gendered male in that language, who toiled the uncharted land with sweat, blood, courage in forging this new white republic. Within this logic, genocide and ethnic cleansing becomes intrinsic to the settler colonial project because there is, in fact, no empty frontier. As the indigenous inhabitants are its primary obstacle, their erasure is a practical issue as well as an ideological one. Today, the upkeep of colonial claims also relies upon a structural and collective amnesia of indigenous histories and ongoing indigenous land bonds. This systemic forgetting is embedded in national origin myths about founding fathers and independence days, in public education and curriculum, in everyday acts of banal nationalism, in popular culture, discourses about immigration, in ongoing policies of denial and dispossession. What does it mean to be an indigenous person today in a society built upon your erasure? Or, as our speaker has poignantly said, to be in my homeland and not have access to my homeland. Today's event underscores the centrality of land in emancipatory struggles and in any vision of an alternative future. And we are so deeply fortunate to have Dr. Simpson today to help us think through these issues from the perspective of radical indigenous resurgence. Leanne Biidaaban Simpson is a renowned Métis Sagik Nishnaabeg scholar, writer, and artist who has been widely recognized as one of the most compelling indigenous voices of her generation. She is the author of 7 previous books, including the newly released A Short History of the Blockade and the novel Nopiming, A Cure for White Ladies, which was released in the US earlier this year by the University of Minnesota Press. As we have always done, Indigenous Freedom Through Radical Resistance was awarded Best Subsequent Book by the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association. Leanne has released 4 albums, including Flight and No Piming Sessions, and her new work is Theory of Ice. Her latest book, co-authored with Robin Maynard and entitled Rehearsals for Living, Conversations on Abolition and Anti-Colonialism, is forthcoming in 2022. Please join me, everyone, in welcoming Dr. Simpson. After this event, Dr. Simpson will be holding a workshop for AU students on radical indigenous resurgence. Leanne, we welcome you here with warmth and deep appreciation. Thank you so much.
Miigwech, anin kinuaya, gitagabaju na denawema, kinagachia Nishnaabeg ogaming na donjaba, nagojawani megwadoda, Biidaasamosa na dijinakaz, nagichinandam gibajayam gibam wachanguk. Hello, friends. I want to thank Irene and Milani for having me as part of this incredible series of thinkers, and thank you for that really brilliant introduction. Thank you, Chelsea, for doing tech support for us today. And I'd also really like to thank all of the students for coming today. I know that this time of year is a very, very stressful time. I can't even imagine what it's like in the COVID year. I think sometimes the last thing students need is more Zoom, but I really appreciate you sharing your time and your hearts and your minds with me today. I am Métis Sagik Nishnaabeg, or Ojibwe, and our territory is on the north shore of Lake Ontario in Canada. We are the eastern part of the Nishnaabeg Nation, and we have close ties to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, with whom we share Lake Ontario. So my particular understanding of life comes from this very particular part of the world. It comes from this Métis Nishnaabeg practice of life, living in deep relationality with the lands, the waters, the plants, the animals, and the peoples of Kinagatsi and Nishnaabeg Oguming, the place where we all live and work together. It comes from Neyano, Nibimong, Gitchikaming, the Great Lakes. It comes from sugar bushes carrying and filtering water from the soil, combining it with light and converting it to sweet sugar. It comes from lake shores full of monomen or wild rice, gathering strength in mid-July and moving from floating to standing. It comes from black bears that wake up in Makwagisis or February, turn in their dens on beds of blueberry branches, and then settle back into fasting and dreaming for a few more weeks. This land has taught me that Nishnaabe life is a continual, reciprocal, reflective, and often critical interaction with my ancestors, those yet to be born, and the nations of plants and animals I share land with. It is a living constellation of co-resistance with all of the anti-colonial peoples of the earth and the worlds they build. And Nishnaabe life is a persistent world building process in spite of and despite the constant imposition of dispossession and the colonial machinery of elimination. And this procedure for Indigenous life and Indigenous living is something that Indigenous people used long before our existences depended upon our ability to resist and survive the violence of racial capitalism, heteropatriarchy, and expansive dispossession. My ancestors woke up each morning and built a Nishnaabe life. They animated our system of governance and diplomacy. They built our collective philosophical and ethical understandings. They made processes for solving conflict and reestablishing balance. They built our economy with the consent of the plant and animal nations they shared time and space with. They built and maintained and nurtured systems for sharing knowledge and taking care of each other. They worked collectively to produce, reproduce, replicate, amplify, and share Nishnaabe life, because if they did not, Nishnaabe world simply wouldn't exist. They were makers. They got up and they worked hard, not the white man wage labor, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday kind of work. Not the kind of work where you outsource the labor of living so you can do something more important, but the kind of work that values the way one lives. They got up, worked hard all day to build a life and to build a world where, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, all life is precious. This algorithm of living, theory and praxis seemingly intertwined and relationally responsive to one another, is generated through relationships with Métis Nishnaabeg land that is constructed and defined by our intimate spiritual, emotional, and physical relationship with it. Living as a creative act. Self-determination, consent, kindness, freedom at the core. Making as the material basis for experiencing and influencing the world. Living with the purpose of generating continual life, replicated over and over. Our infrastructures for life was relationships, not institutions. Our orientation for life was collective and internationalist. We shared space and time with plants, animals, different Indigenous nations, mostly without the use of enclosures and violence. We did not bank capital to protect us against hard times. In times of struggle, we relied upon reciprocal relationships with other beings, with other human families, and with neighboring Indigenous nations in our practice of relational diplomacy. We have always been an intellectual and artistic people. We have always had theory, meaning, philosophy, and ethics, and that theory, meaning, philosophy, and ethics was communicated through the practice of storytelling. The practice of telling stories fills interstitial spaces of worlds with sound, meaning, recognition, and affirmation with all of its generative and degenerative energies. It is a practice of listening with one's open heart to the sound of a Nishnaabe across time and space in all of its manifestations. The practice of telling stories is the practice of sharing and generating a diversity of meanings. It's a practice of deep relationality, not a looking at, but a looking with, or a looking through, or a thinking through together. The practice of telling stories is a practice of scaling and releasing sound across scales, articulating our individual experiences, relating them to the collective, and generating systemic critique. More important than telling is the culture of listening. The practice of telling stories is a practice of constantly building Nishnaabe worlds while simultaneously living in them. We are bodies made of stories and connection, hubs in a network of Indigenous living, and our practice of telling stories is one of the reasons that I'm here today, in spite of the violence of colonialism. On Sunday and Monday of this past week, I was in the sugar bush with my family, making maple syrup out of sap. And I wanted to pay attention to that experience today because it is March. It is this Bakadoke Gizis, the time where Nishnaabe families are in the sugar bush making maple syrup, the time where those stories are really important, the time where we're generating new knowledge through the collective practice of making. This year, of course, it was more difficult because of COVID-19. We can only be around the people that we live with. There are fewer folks that can help. University students were not allowed to participate in land-based activities because of an outbreak at the university. The reserve is closed to people who don't live there, and it's too dangerous for our elder to be there with us. So it was different this year. Still, we are here doing the best we can because this Nishnaabeg practice of boiling sap into sugar over the past decade has been an incredibly generative process for me intellectually, artistically, and personally. And because we are in this Bakadoke Gizis or March right now, I wanted to share this with you. The sugar bush, I think, for a lot of Anishinaabe people and for a lot of our elders, holds a place of warmth and comfort. It's that first warmth of spring that I imagine a lot of you have experienced already, but is just coming to this part of Canada. Even our elders who went to residential schools have really fond memories of being in the sugar bush with their families. And the stories and the ceremonies and the songs and the warmth, I think that goes along with that. So it makes sense that maybe at this point in the university, in the academic calendar, that these stories might be meaningful to a wider audience. So today I'm going to share 4 iterations of the same story. The first one is a Michi-Sagi Nishnaabeg story that features Binonji. The next one is a short sketch of an Nishnaabeg Nanabush story. Nanabush is a traditional teacher and being in our cosmos. The third one is a short fiction story and features Kwe. And the fourth one is a film called Biidaaban that we'll screen together. 4 stories, and your responsibility then is to find a 5th understanding for yourself. You'll experience Nishnaabe aesthetics through repetition, coded and layered meanings, opaqueness, a complex practice of relationality, and an intimate interaction with physical and spiritual realms. You'll experience Nishnaabe world building and resurgence in many different forms. So this first story I learned from Elder Doug Williams from Curve Lake First Nation about 20 years ago, and it's shared with his permission. And today my version of this story is called Binonji Makes a Lovely Discovery. Binonji is out walking in the bush one day. It's Zigwan, that first part of spring where the snow is melting, the lakes are opening up. They're feeling that first warmth of spring on their cheeks. Nikichinandam, they're thinking, I'm happy. Then that Benonji who is out walking, collecting firewood for their dodom. Dodom is a word that Nishnaabe children would call their mothers, and it means my breastfeeder. Then that Benonji who is out walking, collecting firewood for their dodom, decides to sit under the maple tree, Ninatek. Maybe just stretch out, maybe have a little rest, maybe gather firewood a little later. Oh, Nikichi Nendam Nongam, I'm feeling happy today, says that Benonji. And while that Benonji is lying down and looking up, they see a Jidamo up in the tree. Bojo Jidamo, I hope you had a good winter. I hope you had enough food cached. But the squirrel doesn't look up because she's already busy. She's not collecting nuts, Gawin. She's not building her nest, Gawin, not yet. She's not looking after any young, Gawin, it's too early. She's just nibbling on the bark and then doing some sucking. Nibble, nibble, suck. Binonji is feeling a little curious, so they do that too on one of the low branches. Nibble, nibble, suck. This stuff tastes good. It's real sweet water. Then Benonji gets thinking and they make a hole in that tree and they make a slide for the sweet water to run down. They make a container out of birch bark. They collect that sweet water and they take that sweet water home to show their mama. That Dodom is excited and she has 300 questions. Ah, Benonji, what is this? Where did you find it? Which tree? Who taught you how to make it? Did you put tobacco? Did you say thank you? How fast is it dripping? Does it happen all day? Does it happen all night? Where's the firewood? Benonji tells their Dodom the story. She believes every word because they are her Benonji and they love each other very much. Let's cook the meat in it tonight. It will be lovely sweet. Nahau. So they cooked that meat in the sweet water. It was lovely sweet. It was extra lovely sweet. It was sweeter than just that sweet water. The next day, Benonji takes their mama to that tree and their mama brings Nokomis and Nokomis brings all the aunties and there is a very big crowd of Michisagik and Nishnaabe Kwewuk and there is a very big lot of pressure. Benonji tells about a Jidamo. Benonji does the nibble nibble suck part. At first there are technical difficulties and none of it works, but Mama rubs Benonji's back. She tells Benonji that she believes them anyway. They talk about lots of variables like heat and temperature and time, and then Gizis comes out and warms everything up and soon it's drip, drip, drip. Those aunties go crazy, sasakwe, dancing around, hugging a bit too tight, kicking and high-fiving until they take it back home, boil it up and boil it down into sweet, sweet sugar. Ever since, every Zikwan, those Michisagi Nishnaabe Kwewuk collect that sweet water and boil it up and boil it down into that sweet, sweet sugar. All thanks to Benonji and their lovely discovery, and to Jidamo and her precious teaching, and to Nanatak and their boundless sharing. Story number 2. So this one time, Nanabush was out hiking around, as they have always done, trying to visit with the Nishnaabeg, and they couldn't find any of us in the bush. This confused them because it is March and we should be in the sugar bush turning sap into sugar. So they looked and looked and looked, and eventually they found us all lying on our backs, on our couches, watching Netflix and typing important things into our phones. Now, this has happened before, many times before, actually, but the first time it happened, Nanabush was out hiking around, as they have always done, trying to visit with the Nishnaabe, and they can't find us anywhere, so they look and look and look, and finally they find us, and we are all on our backs in the sugar bush with our feet up in the air and our mouths wide open with maple syrup dripping right in. That's right. The first time this happened, it was so long ago that the maple trees weren't making sap, they were making syrup. Now we learned that the first time, when you don't get up and do the work to make a life, the world falls apart. Nanabush decided to go and visit Kukum, their grandmother. Kukum teaches Nanabush the intervention. Kukum teaches them the politics and ethics of how to tap the trees and boil sap into sugar. Kukum teaches them the songs and the ceremonies of how to tap the trees and boil sap into sugar. Kukum teaches them to drink sap every day for Zisbakadoke Jesus. Kukum teaches them how to bring all the people in to help, to visit, and to make decisions. So Nanabush goes back to the Nishnaabe and our sugar bush, ready to do Kukum's intervention. And they go out to the river and they fill up a bucket and they climb all the way to the top of the first maple tree and they pour that bucket of water down the tree. Nanabush goes back and forth and they do this 30 times, one for every day in Zisbakadoke Jesus. Then they move on to the next tree and do the same. And maybe that's how this story happened. Maybe it was 30 buckets, or maybe Nanabush was way too tired to lug that heavy bucket up that tall tree. And maybe they were way, way, way too tired to do it 30 times. And maybe they had to go pee anyway. And maybe they just whipped it out when no one was looking and did a big, long 30 bucket pee down the top of the tree. And maybe they saved themselves 30 trips to the river and 30 trips up the tree. And maybe they are a little closer to some warm soup and a blanket. Maybe it happened that way. But whatever way it happened, by the time that water got filtered all the way through the trees, and by the time Nanabush did every tree in the sugar bush, the syrup dripping into the mouths of the Nishnaabe wasn't syrup anymore. It was more like water. It was more like sap. It was more like tree pee. Nanabush visited with the Nishnaabe and shared what Kukum had taught them. Nanabush visited with us and shared the story of what Kukum had taught them. Kukum, Nanabush, Ninataguk, Jawanong, and Ziguan teach us about the politics, the economy, and the ethics of how to tap the trees and boil sap into sugar. They teach us the songs and the ceremonies of how to tap the trees and boil sap into sugar. They teach us to drink sap every day for Zisbakadoke Jesus. They teach us how to bring all the people in to help, to visit, and to make decisions. We accept their gifts. And every year, no matter how hard it is, we make sure our lips taste the sweetness of sap, even if it is just once, even if there isn't enough to make sugar. We take our kids. We tell the story of Nanabush. We listen for the heartbeat of the land as the sap falls into our pails. We cherish the gift given to our ancestors so long ago. And in our heart knowledge, hidden away in the most precious parts of our beings, we know that the sugar wasn't the real gift. We know that the real gift was in the making, and that without love, making isn't possible. Story number 3 is called Plight. Lucy, Quay, and I walked through the neighborhood last fall when all the trees looked like the time Nanabush hid his kukum in there, like they were being swallowed by flame arms of red and orange. We marked each one with a spray-painted purple thunderbird so we would know which ones are sugar maples when their leaves are gone next spring. Really, we should be able to tell by now by looking at the bark and the way they hold their branches, but we're still too new at it. Quay was pregnant, so I made her stand back from the paint fumes. Lucy made a stencil so the thunderbird would look like a thunderbird and not the death mark the city puts on the trees when they are about to cut them down for safety reasons. Now it's March, and we have 30 tin buckets, 30 new spigots, tobacco, a drill with 2 charged batteries, a 3/8 of an inch drill bit, and 30 flyers to leave in the doors of the houses we're visiting. The neighborhood we're going into votes mostly NDP or Liberal in provincial and federal elections, and they feel relief when they do. They have perennials instead of grass. They get organic local vegetables delivered to their doors twice weekly, in addition to going to the farmer's market on Saturday. They also try to make our neighborhood into an Ontario heritage designation, which I think mostly means you can't do renovations that make your house look like it isn't from the 1800s or rent your extra floors to the lower class. We know how to do this, so they'd be into it. I should hand out the flyers first, have a community meeting, ask permission, listen to their paternalistic bullshit and feedback, let them have influence. Let them bask in the plight of the Native people so they can feel self-righteous and like they have the solution. Make them feel better. And when reconciliation comes up at the next dinner party, they can hold us up as the solution and brag to their real friends about our plight. I proofread the flyer one more time because everyone knows white people hate typos. Hello. We are collecting sap from this maple tree from March 22nd to the 24th. We will be by to collect it once a day, and we will pick up the bucket, lid, and spigot on March 24th. Thank you for your support in our urban sugar making adventure, the FWP Collective. The Fourth World Problems Collective is 3 Nishnaabe Kwewak plus baby Nanatik plus Sabe, but the other 2 don't know he is here. I am the only one that can see him, and only sometimes. Lately, he has been texting me more than showing up in person because he has other clients. He rolls his eyes when I say I'm his client. We're meeting in my backyard to build a fire, smudge, and make some offerings before we begin. The Fourth World Problems Collected had several meetings about the 48 words on the flyer in order to get the proper balance of telling, not asking, while sidestepping suspicion. No one feels good about hiding the fact that we are Mississaugas and that this is us acting on our land, but no one wants to end up a dinner party conversation either. I fought hard for the word adventure because it is such a signifier with this audience, and it makes them part of it, and their only job is to file the flyer on top of the fridge with the bills and the permission slips and forget about it. They can be part of the solution without doing anything. This is a perfect get out of jail free card. No need to call the cops or the city. It's sustainable. Help the Indians and their plight. We debated framing this as performance art. Well, I debated framing this as performance art because white people love that. And if this were the fall and this was Nuit Blanche, we'd be Indian art heroes. We could probably even get a grant, but it's the spring and we actually don't want an audience if we can get away with it. We just want to make syrup in my backyard without it being an ordeal. Sabe texts to say he is running late. Quay is sitting on a white plastic lawn chair breastfeeding baby Nanatik into a sleep coma by lifting up her not murdered, not missing t-shirt. She is laughing, saying this is the least queer thing I do. I try to think of something smart to say, like there's nothing in the NDN queer rule book that says you can't have a baby or breastfeed, but she already knows this. So I just smile and nod. I'm thinking the curve of her breast is sacred and sexy. I'm thinking how much I miss prolactin. I wish the gentleness Quay has for Nanatik, Lucy had for me. Lucy is wearing my black leather motorcycle jacket, chain smoking out of range of Ninaabe with the baby carrier at their feet, ready to carry. They act tougher than they are because this strangulation is not set up for sensitive. I wish they'd soften for me. I wish they'd let me in. I wish they could feel my warmth in a way that would compel them to give back. I wish loving Lucy wasn't so lonely. I mumble some Nishnaabe moan and put my offering in the fire. I think this in English because I don't know how to say any of it. This is our sugar bush. It looks different because there are 3 streets and 150 houses and 1,000 people living in it. But this is my sugar bush. It is our sugar bush. We are the only ones that are supposed to be here. Please help us. I think maybe I should be more specific because the power of the spiritual world is never super clear to me. Obviously, I need their help. They must know that, but I know it's important to ask. What am I really asking for? Help being undetected, help collecting the sap the next day and boiling it down for 12 hours in the backyard, help dealing with the authorities, help while I sit at the edge of Lucy. I watch the flames as they disappear my tobacco and carry my thoughts to those that care. We each take our turn walking around the fire in the right direction, smudge the gear, and put it into our backpacks, but we are not done feeding this fire. Kwe takes off their ceremony skirt, the one she sewed tobacco into the hem, but sometimes resents being forced to wear, and she puts it in the fire. Lucy pours 1 shot of whiskey into the fire for their auntie that passed 3 years ago. I smoke my pipe, even though there is blood, because I am powerful and beautiful and sacred, and I always deserve to be reminded. Then we carry the buckets and the Ninaabe to the car. I have 3 pieces of maple sugar from last year in my pocket in case we need to distract the baby from reality for a few minutes, just in case we need quiet. I think if I get caught, hide my kids. We drive the car around the corner to the first tree. It is darker and colder than I thought. I wish I could have worn my winter boots instead of my running shoes with plastic bread bags inside them to keep my feet dry. I set down my backpack onto the packing snow and put a tiny pile of tobacco at the base of the tree. Kwe takes Ninaabe out of the carrier and sits at the base of the tree, nursing. I see salmon, eel, caribou, eagle, and crane circling our sugar bush at the end of the street. Lucy rubs their hands on her bark. I hope this doesn't hurt. Sabe kisses my forehead, steps back, and then disappears. I hesitate, and then I take out the drill. The 4th story is a short stop-motion animation film called Biidaaban. Biidaaban is a word in my language that means the first light of dawn. The be means the future is coming at you. The da means the home, your home or the present. And ba or ban is a suffix that we put on the end of a word or at the end of a person's name when they've passed on. So Biidaaban, the first light of dawn, is the present. And the present is composed of that future and the past collapsing in on itself. So this project was a stop motion animation. It took 30 people about 2 years to construct the world. Amanda Strong is a Métis filmmaker, and she is the director and the filmmaker. And I guess we'll screen the film and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. We are always almost drowning. We are the best trained troops that refuse to fight. We are hyped up on aesthetics and tripped up by real life. We don't have time to feel these feelings, so we'll file that for another day. We don't plan for the win. We always lose anyway. Caribou ghosts and untold stories. harbor ghosts and untold stories, bad timing and smashed hearts, train tracks, six-pack, riffraff, deadening regret, a collection of old parts. We get these tiny gifts of tremendous, unclouded by past dues. We get these tiny moments, but there's never enough glue. We'll tie ourselves together with bungee cords, luck, bring the fish, the fire, the new knife. Catharsis is still elusive, so we'll save that for another day. Meet me at the underpass. Rebellion is on their way. So I hope that these stories provided you with a little bit of hope and inspiration and comfort. And we have time for questions now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simpson. Yeah, let's take some questions, and I would love to really encourage the students in particular to submit your questions. This is an amazing opportunity to be able to have this conversation.
And maybe I'll just start off.
Please.
Thank you so much for that incredibly powerful and beautiful and evocative intervention that I think fundamentally disrupts the time-space of the academic industrial university complex in so many different ways, which is so much of what your project is. I wanted to ask you about Nishnaabeg and the figure of the teacher here. And in your writing, you said that, you know, this is not somebody who can be subdued by colonial knowledge systems or kind of sort of fit within the university. And so, you know, I wanted to ask you, who are our Nishnaabeg's, right? Who, I mean, for students who are obviously within the conventional public school system followed by the university system, you know, who are our contemporary Nishnaabeg's, and is there the potential at all for somehow bringing the profound intelligence of the Nishnaabeg into these spaces or university spaces, or you see the two as completely incompatible?
I think oftentimes Nishnaabeg is labeled as a trickster sort of character. To me, Nishnaabeg is Nishnaabeg. They're a teacher. They're in my culture sort of half spirit, half human. Most of Nishnaabe education is a very sort of horizontal, lateral experience without hierarchy, without school, without institutions. So it's very much learning by doing and observing. So I would think that who are the folks in your life that you learn from because of what they're modeling and what they're embodying and how they carry themselves in the world. I think there's all kinds of sort of Nana Bush energies on the margins of the university and making interventions into university. I think that we all have people in our lives that are embodying knowledge, that are modeling, that are teaching by example, and they're not sort of teaching in a didactic sort of, I have all the information and now I'm going to impart it on you. And so I think, to me, that's a different way of looking at teaching. It's looking at lifelong learning. It's not just intellectual knowledge, but also emotional knowledge and spiritual knowledge and practice. I think oftentimes our activist communities embody, they're making communities, they're embodying, they're generating a kind of theory and a kind of knowledge that often intersects with the academy, but is often not sort of centered and not respected, and often is sort of just taken by the academy. So I think that's sort of another broader source.
I think related to that, we have a great question from a student, from Gab Siegfried, who says, you mentioned how listening is almost more integral than storytelling at times. Do you have any tips for those of us who want to strengthen our active listening skills? How have you translated these listening skills to your activism work?
I think in my culture, listening, it's a different skill set than it is at university. I remember being at university in lectures, and you're listening for what's going to be on the exam, or you're listening for what your instructor values, or you're listening to get that content because you're going to be tested on that content. And so I think in my culture, listening is a relationality. It's a way of letting someone else's energy sort of into your body. So there's also sort of ethics and boundaries associated with it. You're listening with your full body, not just your head, but your head combined with your heart and your spirit. The way I think listening is very, very valued in oral traditions or oral practices. And so sometimes you hear something, or something sort of grabs you, like anything sort of that I've presented today, perhaps, and you can't immediately respond to it. You need to take it, and you need to think about it and work with it and travel with it for a little bit before you're able to sort of have a response. And I think that listening then sort of slows down the learning process, and it deepens the learning process, and it centers your own sort of body within that, not sort of as a vessel to be filled up, but as part of an intelligent sort of living being network that's linked to the collective.
Thank you, Dr. Simpson. I think that speaks well into another question I think we have coming from a student. Can you speak more about how you see the spirit connected to the intellect in the way you write about intellectual, emotional, and spiritual knowledge being interconnected?
So in my first book called Dancing on a Turtle's Back, I wrote about this quite a bit in terms of Nishnaabe creation stories and how that has given birth to Nishnaabe thought systems. And in our understanding, or in our construction of the cosmos or the universe, knowledge is a combination of intellect, like your head, and also your heart, and the relationship between those two things. And so the way that life is organized in Nishnaabe thought is not so much around human, non-human, but it's around living, non-living. And of course, most of the things in the Nishnaabe world prior to colonialism and capitalism would be living things. Anything that is alive has a spirit. Anything that has a spirit has its own kind of self-determination and freedom. And so it makes things like a relationship with maple trees an actual relationship, because those maple trees have spirit and I have spirit. And so it's almost like the process of making maple sugar is a treated relationship between the two that's reciprocal.
Thank you. This one comes from Veronica Limeberry, building from Professor Ranganathan's question and inspired by your book, as we have always done. I'm an Indigenous PhD student in international relations, obviously operating within this very specific structure, but in what ways is it possible, as one advances their dissertation, to imbue resistances, stories, Indigenous wisdom, and worldviews, to push back against the expected ways of being and presenting your work in academia?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that's really great about being an Indigenous PhD student right now is that there is a tremendous body of literature that didn't exist 20 years ago. In order for us to be able to have a specificity to our work and have it be evidence-based in ways that the Academy deems rigorous and legible. So I think there's lots of ways of pushing back. I think a PhD dissertation isn't the easiest way to do that. You are not in this hierarchical structure of the Academy. You are not one of the most powerful people, and so it's much easier to do later. But also, I think we all sort of have this responsibility of pushing the boundaries wherever we can, and I think there's just such a tremendous body of literature right now that you can use to justify doing almost anything in a dissertation. And I think that's really, really exciting.
Yeah, thank you for that answer, very thoughtful answer, and great question as well. So this question comes from Yasmin Salam, who asks, throughout the stories in the stop motion film, I felt such a great sense of warmth yet grief because of the confounding restrictions from abstract figures. And so she was thinking especially of the personification of the garage lights. It almost seemed like searchlights, right? And the water hose and the sprinklers, and then the orange net covering the tree. And she felt sort of frustration at these objects. And so she wants to ask, I wanted to ask how you feel it is best to try and communicate these tensions outwards to people who might not understand, right? And maybe a broader question is, what were you trying to communicate through these inanimate objects and their sort of power over the young girl and her teacher?
That is exactly what we were trying to communicate, because I've actually had audiences of white folks view the film and not understand why anybody wouldn't feel comfortable and safe in this community, and why tapping maple trees would feel like you're doing something wrong, or would feel like an intervention, or sort of that violence that was hinted at. We decided strategically to hint at the violence because we wanted Indigenous audiences, particularly youth, we didn't want to trigger them. We didn't want to bring more violence into their lives, but we wanted to have sort of a truthful sort of understanding of that. So we didn't want to have the violence be the center. We wanted to have that relationship, that loving relationship between Biidaaban and Sabe. We wanted to have this gender non-conforming Indigenous youth as normal and perfectly comfortable in this environment. And we decided to show sort of the white supremacy, the capitalism in the searchlights and in the hose, to show sort of even things as sacred as water can be weaponized and used against you. And I also wanted to sort of highlight that this is about struggle. A lot of times you think of going back to the land and making maple sugar in this romantic way, and it can be beautiful and it can be lovely, but in my territory, it can also be a struggle, and it can also be a site where you experience a lot of racism and a lot of the sorts of tensions that you see in the film.
And related to the personification of these objects of property and pacification and enclosure, Carmen Bolt is asking, we often discuss, does change come from working within these institutions and systems, right, that are oppressive, or from outside of them? And is that sort of conversation, across that dialectic, something that you have within your Nishnaabe communities as well, you know, about sort of what are the points of leverage as far as change comes, I guess reflecting on both the inside and the outside nature.
I think those conversations certainly happen in the Indigenous community. I think that I'm particularly interested in building the alternative in the present. So I'm particularly interested in the kinds of knowledge that is generated through these this small group of people going out in an urban area and enacting a Nishnaabe freedom, a Nishnaabe sovereignty, a Nishnaabe resurgence, a Nishnaabe sugar making. I'm interested in the kinds of knowledge that they learned in that decolonial space or anti-colonial space, temporary space that they create for themselves. Because I think every time we do those small sort of collective acts, we're learning something, and we're learning about how to build and maintain the alternative to racial capitalism, heteropatriarchy, and white supremacy.
Thank you. I think this next question, maybe our final question, I think picks up on some points you're making there. This comes from Leah Cheek. I'm thinking about how you share that the process of making is the true gift. In my experience of the fourth story you shared, the process of making was one where I felt the scrutiny, policing, danger, and harm. Do you think that this new piece of the process still contains gift and a lesson within it? And I wonder how this speaks wider to the process of making and interrupting and reinscribing one's existence in a context where your existence is criminalized simply for being. So the act of making in this context that this person was experiencing as a harm and dangerous moment as well. Is there still a lesson and a gift within?
I mean, I'm careful thinking of harm and violence as a gift, because I think that I'm interested in building a world where violence is unthinkable and harm is continually sort of, I think, dealt with through reciprocal and accountable reparative sorts of systems that keep folks safe and healthy and relating to each other in a good way. I think that we learn most as humans when we are all able to be our best authentic selves, and when we're focused on not so much self-care, but the care and the act of community. That's not to say that I haven't learned things from violent acts or from harm that's happened to me. But I actually think that I would know much more. I think my nation would be much intellectually richer if we'd never experienced the violence of colonialism.
Thank you. And I think perhaps one thing I read from that, and perhaps I'm mistaken from the question too, is the fear, the genuine fear that comes from the power of making in this space. And so wanting to enact these daily, acts of resurgence while knowing the material consequences that can come from that act itself, and how we navigate that tension, knowing that resistance requires those acts.
Which I think is something that's very normalized for Black folks, for people of color, for Indigenous folks. I mean, we don't feel safe on the street. And that's to the point where that's a fairly normalized experience, I think, for us. And so the idea that Biidaaban would feel safe walking down a street in an urban Canadian city is that's something that I think right now is something that we can aspire to, but it's certainly not something we've achieved in Canada.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simpson. I want to be mindful that you're going to be to have some break before you generously hold the workshop for our students. So I think this is a point where we're going to say thank you, and thank you for the questions that have been coming in, and sorry that we haven't been able to answer. But I think either way, we're taking and experiencing this conversation as meaningful and thoughtful, and I know for me, things have been swirling around throughout this series. Thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Simpson.
Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion in the workshop. Miigwech.
Thank you so much.
And please join us in our final installment of this series coming on April 11th, which is Palestine in the Global South, and it's going to be a roundtable on emancipatory futures. Take care, everybody. Thank you.